Well, all right. Let's get started this evening. Thank you for taking time to join us for our top 5 mistakes entrepreneurs make in raising funding. This is a chance that we can share with you our experience that we've had in helping people raise over $50 million in funding for their startup in the past 2 years. And of course, we'll be glad to take your questions along the way. We'll probably go through the slides first, and there's about 15 of them, and then stop and go back and ask what questions you have about the slides or about your fundraising experience. So with that, let's go ahead and kick off. If you have any questions, there's a question box on the screen there. Just type them in as you think of them, and when we get to a stopping point, we'll read those out and answer them as we go along the way. I will send out the copy of the slides to you later, so if you don't need to take notes unless you want to, because we'll make that available to you here tomorrow. So with that, let's go ahead and kick into it. So you want to raise funding, or you probably wouldn't be on this webcast today, and you probably are starting or growing your business, and you find that you need funding in order to do so. And you probably heard something about raising funding from angel investors or venture capitalists before, and you want to learn more about the process. And what we're going to do is show you the top 5 mistakes entrepreneurs make in raising funding, and that's the goal of today's presentation. So my background before we kick into it is I've been an angel investor for over 10 years, and I've started 3 formal angel networks in the Central Texas area, and I currently run an open funding forum series monthly in which we take 10 entrepreneurs to pitch to a panel of 10 investors, and we then for 10 minutes each, and we do this all over the state of Texas. And so I've seen thousands of business plans and pitches, and I've coached hundreds of companies through the process. And so what I'll do is share my experience with you today. So what mistakes do people make in fundraising? Well, the first one is they have unrealistic expectations. Their expectation is often, it should take a few weeks to a month to go raise a substantial amount of money. The reality is it takes a year to raise $1 million, and that's my benchmark. And just to see where the time goes, you have to spend time preparing the business and the documents, and that usually takes 1 to 2 months. You have to go and pitch to investors in person. You're asking them to write $25, $50, $75, even $100,000 checks, and they have many questions to ask, and they want to know who you are before they actually go and write those checks. Investors usually take 3 to 6 months to perform due diligence, just to see if you execute and just to understand the business. And there's also signing legal documentation and picking up the checks, and that alone takes 1 to 2 months of the process. And if you add this up, you get close to a year just to do a fundraise. Oh, and by the way, holidays and summer vacations will slow things down. People always come to me in the middle of July wanting to raise funding, and I have to caution them that there's very few investors around in the summer months. They're off someplace else for their holiday, and so things do move, but they move much slower. The second mistake people make is they lack a strategy. Just pitching the investors, doesn't work. You really need a bigger plan. In fact, you need a strategy, and that strategy includes knowing where you can go find investors, and then preparing the investor for your pitch. Most people just hit the investor straight away with the ask, but without really giving enough detail about what they're doing. And you need to understand what investors are looking for. And then your plan needs to include finding a lead investor. The lead investor is the first one to put in the money, and that can be a challenge sometimes because the first one in may be the only one in, and no investor wants to be the only one in a deal, because without additional funding it can't go anywhere. And so you have to find a way to identify a lead investor and then encourage someone to take the extra risk to go first, and that can be a problem. And you need a closing process to finish the round. At some point you'll have the interest there, people ready to write checks, but you have to go and push it through to get everything closed, get the document signed, get the check signed, and get it done in a timely manner. And we have ways of doing that as well. The third mistake people make is the lack of follow-up. Many entrepreneurs never follow up. They wait for the investor to call them. In fact, often entrepreneurs go and pitch to investors, and if they don't see a checkbook coming out at the end of the pitch, well, then it was a failure. And nothing could be further from the truth. The idea is that you have to go build a relationship with the investor. And so you should be contacting the investor and asking for a follow-up meeting after you pitch them, after you send them the exec summary. In every case, you're looking for the next meeting. You're looking for another discussion. You're looking for another touch point with the investor. And one way to do that is you should be sending monthly updates about your deal, about your progress you're making on your business, and you should be sending that to your investor prospects every month, just a short 2-3 paragraph email. Because what you need to do is you need to educate the investor on your deal. They need to have enough information that they really understand what is going on and what it is doing. And so, as I said before, you should build a relationship with the investor. And if you ever bring on an investor into your company, it's almost like a marriage. You're with that person for a long time, working with them week in and week out, and so it is worth your time and effort to go build a relationship and identify the right investor for your deal, because you'll be with them for a long time. The fourth mistake people make is the lack of key documents. What I see often is most entrepreneurs start the process unprepared. They go out there and start pitching investors, but what we should first do is develop 3 core documents before we do that. And the first is what's called the executive summary. This is a one-page summary of your entire business that talks about everything related to the business, such as the problem you solve, the solution you offer, the product you offer, the market you're targeting, the competitive advantage you have, the financials that you expect to achieve with the funding, and the funds raised that you're going to seek and what you're going to do with those funds. And then also, and most importantly, the management team, who is going to actually bring this together and make things happen. And there's other things on there that are important, but one of the most important things you must put on an executive summary is your contact details. About 50% of all exec summaries I receive have no one's name, phone number, or email address on there, and I have no way of contacting them as an investor because it's not there. So make sure you put your contact details on them, because that's what gets sent to investors first, and it gets passed around from investor to investor, group to group, which is what you want. You want exposure, so there can't be anything confidential in the executive summary. It has to be very much for public information. Most investors are not going to sign non-disclosure agreements to look at your executive summary. And so what you can do is simply write it so that it talks about the benefits of what you're doing and not how exactly you're doing something, if you're trying to protect trade secrets or something of the like. The next thing you need is what's called the pitch deck. And this is 12 to 15 slides that, again, covers every topic that's in your executive summary. And you need to be able to tell it in a smooth way. You're basically like telling your story. So after you send the executive summary to a potential investor, you ask, would you like to learn more? And if they say yes, well, you go and meet with them, and you walk through your slides, and you give them the full story, what you're doing, how you're doing it. And, of course, they'll have lots of questions for you along the way. The next thing is you need 5-year financial projections, very detailed projections. And you need to be able to, after the pitch deck, if they express interest, and maybe you should ask, would you like to learn more, then you send them the 5-year financials for them to review and to ask any questions they may have about that. But notice what's not on that list. There is no 50-page business plan. There is no private placement memorandum. And I see those less and less these days. And in fact, I see many deals get funded without having any of that written down. And my recommendation is to not spend time writing business plans unless an investor asks for it and you feel like that's a worthy thing to do with your time. The next thing that you'll need to do after financial projections is come up with due diligence documents. And after financial projections, if an investor is interested, well, at that point, they're really going into due diligence to learn about your deal, and they must be fairly serious because it does take a substantial amount of time to go look at these documents. And they include things such as your legal entity, your corporate filings, any intellectual property filings you may have, credit reports, historical financials, and there are many checklists out there that people use for doing due diligence. And my recommendation is, before you start fundraising, is to start gathering those documents together now. I find often that due diligence is held up by 20 to 30 days because the entrepreneur is busy running around trying to gather those documents up. And for some reason, they don't seem to be spread all over the city. They seem to be spread all over the country, trying to get things from their accountant in New York and their financial planner in San Francisco, and it seems like it takes a long time to gather these documents together. So as an exercise, you might try and pull those documents together now and see if you can put the paper copy on your desk in one place and see how long it takes you to do that. But so having these key documents really helps facilitate the process, because as you go through and meet with investors, your goal is to take them one step further in the process, and you'll need these documents in order to do that. The fifth problem or fifth mistake that I see people make when they raise funding is they focus on the product. Most entrepreneurs talk only about the product. Most pitch sessions are 10 minutes long, and left to themselves, most entrepreneurs would spend 8 of the 10 minutes just talking about what the product is and how it works. But the idea is that you need to focus on the business itself, not just the product, and emphasize the other elements of the business, because that's what the investor wants to know. Yes, they want to know what the product is, but they also want to know, and in equal proportion, about your target market, your competitive position, your marketing plans, your sales channel, all the things you put in your executive summary, they want to know. And so after describing the product in a short amount of time, you need to save time in your pitch to cover these other elements. Because you're selling the company, you're not selling the company's product to the investor. And so the key thing for this aspect is to make sure you identify all the values you have built into the company and communicate those values. The rule of the exec summary and the pitch deck is, if you don't mention it, it doesn't exist. So I've had entrepreneurs come in with revenue, but they didn't mention it, and therefore they didn't get follow-up meetings, and only later did they realize that that was a key issue. So part of your challenge is to go through and make sure you understand and identify all the key values in your business, and you mention or touch on them in the exec summary and the pitch deck, so people know that there's something there. And then in a follow-up meeting, you can flesh it out in much more detail as well. So in summary, the 5 mistakes that entrepreneurs make is, number 1, they have unrealistic expectations. They think it takes it's much shorter to raise funding than they think it takes. They don't have a strategy for finding investors, pitching investors. There's no real plan there. It's just a haphazard, who do I know and who can I pitch to, without follow-up. And then number 3 is the lack of follow-up. And it takes more than just dropping an email saying, would you like to learn more? You have to go back and re-engage potential investors. You have to have further touch points. You need to be inviting them back out for a lunch or coffee over time to update them on their progress. You need to be sending email updates about how you're doing. And then next is lack of key documents. Not having your documents ready to go is a big issue. And number 5 is focusing only on the product and not the company itself. So those are the 5 mistakes that entrepreneurs make in raising funding. And so at this point, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in, and we'll take a few moments to answer those questions, and we'll see what we can do with those. Okay, the first question is, I'm raising $500,000. Does that mean it will take me 6 months? The answer is probably no. $1 million in 1 year is just a benchmark. You still have to go spend a month or 2 just to raise, put your documents together and get the company ready. You still have to go and pitch investors, and so it will probably take you more like 7, 8, 9 months to raise funding, even at $500K, because you may get some good checks in up front from family and friends, and that's where you normally start, but to finish it out often takes a long time. I often have entrepreneurs coming to me asking, when I ask them how much you're trying to raise, the automatic response is $1 million. And then when I ask, what do you do with it, sometimes people are not quite sure what they're going to do with $1 million, but it just seems like that's the thing to do. And so what I always recommend to people to do is raise a much smaller amount up front, say $250,000. And make sure you get good traction in the market and get a good product out there and build a good team, because those things add to your valuation. That's how much your company is worth before you take on the investment, and it determines how much ownership you're giving away for the money. And so if you don't have a product, you don't have a team, and you're raising $1 million, you're giving away a very large percent of your company. If you can shrink that down to just only $250,000 for at the same time, then you don't give away so much. And then after you build a product and build a team and get some customers, well, you can raise $750,000 or even more down the way at a much better valuation for yourself. So think about valuation and how it impacts what you're doing here. Next question is the key documents. I've heard that some investors require PPMs. What do you see? And the answer is that's correct. I do hear from time to time investors asking for a private placement memorandum, a PPM, and that's simply your business plan with a term sheet attached, and it's been blessed by a lawyer, and it will also cost you $10,000 to $15,000 to put together. And there are some advantages of those. They are very good in that they make you think through every aspect of your business and vet it very well, because it is now part of a legal document. But if the investor is not asking for that, I probably wouldn't put that together, just because the days of PPMs and formal business plans seem like they're receding a little bit, and we're moving into a new era where it's really more about just the exec summary, the financial statements, and what you're going to do with it. So it just doesn't seem like a big issue as much anymore. The next question is, in the strategy section, what do you do about finding investors? Well, what we're teaching you to do is first start with your network. Everybody associated with your company, we recommend you go out and you ask them for 10 potential investor names. So anybody that's a part of the company probably knows accredited investors, and if they look a little bit, they can probably find 10 names and email addresses, and they can send out the exec summary to them in order to get them interested. If you have a board of advisors or board of directors, you should go to them and ask as well. Also ask your attorney, and I do that often. First thing I do is I go to the attorney on record for the company and I ask, we need 10 names for investors. If you can produce those, we'll love to keep your services. If you can't, we'll probably be finding another attorney who can. So there's numerous ways to find it, but the first place is to start with your own network and to make sure everybody associated with the project is giving their best effort in identifying potential investors and getting the executive summary out to the investor to look at, and getting potential follow-up meetings set up based on that. What other questions do we have out there? I think that's it for the first round itself. If you have any questions, just go ahead and type them in, and we'll answer those. Of course, we'll be glad to answer these questions offline. Just drop me an email. I'll be glad to dialogue with you about your funding project and what you're trying to do as well. So go ahead and type those in when you get a chance, and we may not be here the entire hour if we don't have that many questions to answer. Okay, the question is, what about a legal entity? I have an LLC? What else do I need? And yes, you do need a legal entity. Yes, you can get an LLC, use an LLC in order to take investment. I know many investors don't like LLCs. They prefer C corporations because it provides for a board of directors. It provides for multiple investors. S corps, for example, have a limitation on the number of investors you can bring into your deal. And so when you go up to an investor, you need to be showing up with a C corporation. Most companies start with an LLC, and then when it's time to raise funding, they switch it to a C corporation. That's probably a smart thing to do. There are additional costs in running a C corporation when you're in the bootstrap phase, and so you don't have to start with a C corporation, but when you go to raise funding, it's probably a good idea. I often get asked about a Delaware C versus a Texas C corporation, and if you're raising funding in Texas, then a Texas C corporation is sufficient. If you plan to raise funding on the West Coast or the East Coast, then a Delaware C is probably going to look more appropriate to them. Technically, the Delaware C is the best format for a corporation, but what you'll find in practical reality is that a Texas C corporation is just very, very close right behind it. It's not that far away, and you can use that for what you're trying to do. Let's see, the next question has to do with the follow-up. What's the appropriate time frame to follow up with an investor after a pitch? I think the appropriate time frame is immediately. You know, the very next day after a pitch, you're emailing back whatever they ask for, additional documents, answering questions, and so forth. And then you're asking to see if they have interest to learn more, and then you're trying to progress them to the next level. We don't want to be demanding, but at the same time, when they're the most interested right after you've had the pitch, and so you don't want to let 2 or 3 or 4 days or even a week lapse before you get back in touch with them. No more than a day later, you need to be returning the information to them and looking for the next step, or setting up the next step maybe a couple of weeks later for the next part of the process. I've often had entrepreneurs come back to me a month later after meeting an investor saying that they still need to get back in touch with them, and I tell them the chances of there still being interest is pretty low. Investors get drawn away very quickly to other things, and so you want to strike while the iron is hot there. The next question is about time frames or time of year for raising funding. What's the best time of year to go raise funding? There's no one time that's good. The only times that are really bad are during major holidays in the summer. So if you look at most angel groups, they start at the end of August, and they have deal flow meetings till about early December. Then they stop and they pick up in mid-January, and they go till about the end of May, and some go on into June. I've heard the rule that when the schools are in session, we have angel meetings. When the schools are not in session, we don't have angel meetings, because typically people are away on family trips at that time. So you just want to make sure that you're not getting into the summer months as well. Let's see. So looking for online ad agency for current centers, CPC, and available daily impression info for several ad vehicles, and any agencies in Austin which work with TXC networks. So if you're looking for an online ad agency, we know several people that work in this space, and we'll be glad to send you some names of people that might be able to help you with that. And then we may talk offline to make sure we understand exactly what kind of group you're looking for. So have old info from 2 years ago. I'm not quite sure what that means, but if you want to put in a clarifying comment, we can try and answer that as well. Next question is on finding investors again. Aside from your attorney, who else should you ask to find investors? Well, after you've exhausted your family and friends, and you've exhausted the family and friends of your family and friends, so the network of your network basically, the next thing is to look at all of your service providers, not only the attorney but also your accountant, anybody that's providing you any services. We're asking them to go see if they know of any investors, and we're trying to pull in more names and email addresses of people that might be of interest to set up a follow-up meeting as well. There are formal angel groups out there. It's best to know someone at the formal angel group. So the idea is you want to find a sponsor, find a member, find someone who's connected with the group who will represent your deal to the group and bring it in and make sure people understand it and champion it to some level. So in your effort to get ready for fundraising, finding key people in that area is part of the task. Let's see. What other questions do we have? I think that's it from now. Let's see. Are there any other questions out there at this point? Well, we do have other webinars we will be telling you about. After this one, we have a 4-week webinar that goes through the process of raising funding from angels, and it starts from the very beginning, getting ready through finding investors, pitching them, doing negotiations, valuations, identifying a lead investor, closing the round, signing the documents, communicating with the investors along the way, and then wrapping up the term sheet. So if you're of interest to learn about the full process, we'll be kicking off next month in August. Mid-August, we'll have a 4-week series, 1 hour each week, on how to raise angel funding for your deal. We also have a series on crowdfunding. Crowdfunding, for those who don't know it, is simply sourcing funding through the website. You put your deal up on a web portal such as Kickstarter or Rocket Hub, and you invite people to go invest in it. And it's very similar to raising funding from angels, but the format is very different because it's all online. Although many investors will call you up and will want to dialogue with you and will interact with you offline through phone calls or conference calls or email, and they'll want to learn more about your deal. So it's got a lot of the same dynamics, but you're reaching a larger audience now because you're using the web to help you with that. And finally, we offer an investor relations program, and in this program, we take you through the entire 6-month process where we introduce you to investors, and we help you with the process of raising funding, getting your documents ready, sending monthly updates to your investor prospects, and making sure that investors are aware of what you're doing and keeping up with your progress as well. So if we can help you with any of those things, please let us know. If you have any other questions, go ahead and type them in now. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap up. This is what we have for you tonight. These are the 5 mistakes that entrepreneurs make when they raise funding, and we see it every day. And hopefully, you can use this to navigate around the rocky shoals and get to the path of meeting investors and successfully raising funding for your startup. And again, I will send you a copy of these slides tomorrow. And if you have any questions, just reply back to that email, and I'll be glad to answer those offline. Any last questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much, guys. Appreciate your taking time to talk, and we'll talk to you next time. And feel free to sign up in our Connect program if you want to learn more about First Look forums, funding forums, and other activities that we have going. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.